Picture this. The roar of a bloodthirsty Roman crowd echoes through the Colosseum. Steam rises from a massive iron cauldron as boiling oil bubbles violently within. Standing at 6 feet tall on 3 enormous stones, this instrument of death has claimed countless victims. But today, something impossible is about to happen. A man is about to be thrown into that seething cauldron of death and emerge completely unharmed. Not only that, he'll continue preaching the gospel from within the boiling oil itself, his voice rising above the shocked gasps of thousands of spectators. This isn't fiction. This isn't legend. This is the documented account of John the Apostle, the only disciple of Jesus Christ who refused to die. But to understand how we got to this moment of divine intervention, we need to journey back to the beginning. To a time when following Christ meant signing your own death warrant. Welcome to the 1st century Roman Empire, where human life held less value than a good gladiator show. In this world of marble columns and golden palaces, brutality wasn't just accepted, it was entertainment. Crucifixions lined the roads like street lamps. Public executions drew bigger crowds than chariot races. And in this savage landscape, being a Christian wasn't just dangerous, it was a guaranteed path to an agonizing death. The early Christian church didn't start as the global religion we know today. It began as a tiny, persecuted sect within the Jewish community. From day one, they faced opposition from every direction. Their own people rejected them. The Romans hunted them. Death stalked them at every corner. Before the Apostle Paul became Christianity's greatest evangelist, he was its most ruthless persecutor. Picture a man so consumed with religious zeal that he made it his personal mission to hunt down Christians like wild animals. Saul of Tarsus, as he was known then, didn't just disagree with Christians. He wanted them eliminated. The Bible tells us that when Stephen, one of the first Christian martyrs, was brutally stoned to death for his faith, Saul stood watching. Not only did he refuse to intervene, he approved of the execution. He held the coats of the men throwing the stones, essentially serving as an accessory to murder. But God had other plans for this persecutor. After his dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus, Paul would experience firsthand the persecution he once inflicted on others. The hunter became the hunted. The Bible records his suffering in stark detail. Whipped 5 times by his former allies, beaten with rods 3 times, stoned and left for dead once. The man who once pursued Christians to their deaths now found himself constantly running from his own. By 41 AD, the political landscape had shifted dramatically. Herod Agrippa had claimed the title of King of the Jews, expanding his territory and effectively reviving the ancient kingdom of Judea. But his hunger for power came with a price. He needed to appease his Jewish subjects, and nothing pleased them more than the persecution of Christians. It was during this dark period that James the Great, one of Jesus' closest disciples, was executed. Peter, the rock upon which Christ promised to build his church, narrowly escaped death. Other apostles scattered like leaves in a hurricane, fleeing for their lives. When Herod Agrippa died in 44 AD, you might think the persecution would ease. Instead, it intensified. Roman procurators took control. And while there was relative peace until 62 AD, it was the calm before the storm. The breaking point came when Procurator Porcius Festus died, leaving a dangerous power vacuum. The high priest Ananus ben Ananus seized this opportunity like a predator sensing weakness. He launched a vicious attack on the Christian community and executed James the Just, the leader of the Jerusalem church. The first Jewish rebellion erupted like a volcano, triggered by the Romans' brutal killing of 3,000 Jews. The resulting war would reshape history forever. In 70 AD, Jerusalem, the holy city, the center of Jewish worship for over 1,000 years, was utterly destroyed. The temple, that magnificent structure that is a symbol of God's presence, was reduced to rubble. This catastrophic event marked the end of Second Temple Judaism as the world had known it. From its ashes, 2 distinct paths emerged. One would evolve into Rabbinic Judaism, the other would become Christianity as we know it today. Now, let me introduce you to the hero of our story, but prepare to have your preconceptions shattered. When most people think of John the Apostle, they picture a gentle, soft-spoken man, perhaps with flowing hair and kind eyes. After all, he's known as the disciple whom Jesus loved and the apostle of love. But this image couldn't be further from the truth of who John was when Jesus first called him. John was a fisherman. Not the romantic, peaceful kind you might imagine, but a rough-weathered, hot-tempered man who made his living battling the elements on the Sea of Galilee. Along with his brother James, John earned a nickname from Jesus himself: Sons of Thunder. This wasn't a compliment, it was a warning. These brothers had explosive tempers and zero patience for anyone who opposed them or their master. When a Samaritan village refused to welcome Jesus, John and James's immediate response was shocking. "Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" Think about that for a moment. Their solution to rejection was genocide. They wanted to call down divine fire to incinerate an entire village because they wouldn't give Jesus a warm welcome. Jesus had to rebuke them for this bloodthirsty suggestion. And Mark tells us that perhaps the look on Jesus' face was more painful than any words he could have spoken. This was John's starting point. A man so consumed with righteous anger that his first instinct was always violence. But here's what makes John's story so incredible. The same man who wanted to burn down villages became known as the Apostle of Love. The fisherman with the explosive temper became the one who wrote, "God is love." This transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a process that took years, marked by failures, rebukes, and gradual spiritual growth. Jesus invested enormous time and energy in shaping these rough disciples, and none needed more shaping than the Sons of Thunder. John had to learn love the hard way. He had to discover that true strength isn't found in domination, but in service. That real power isn't about calling down fire from heaven, but about reflecting the love of heaven to earth. By the end of his life, this former Son of Thunder had condensed all his teaching into one simple, profound command. Little children, love one another. He, according to ancient witnesses, whenever anyone asked John for advice or asked him to speak, this was his go-to response. When people questioned why he always said the same thing, John would reply, "If this one command is properly followed, everything else will take care of itself." Now we come to the moment that defies all human understanding, the miracle that proved God's hand was unmistakable upon John's life. Emperor Domitian, one of history's most ruthless persecutors of Christians, had had enough of this troublesome apostle. John's influence in Ephesus was growing too strong, his message spreading too rapidly. Something had to be done. The emperor's solution was as brutal as it was public. John would be boiled alive, well before a massive crowd in Rome. Picture the scene. Thousands of spectators packed into the amphitheater, their bloodthirsty roars echoing off marble walls. The massive cauldron, standing 6 feet tall on 3 enormous stone pillars, dominated the arena floor. Underneath, a raging fire consumed logs continuously fed by sweating executioners. The oil inside bubbled and spat with deadly heat. This wasn't just hot. This was liquid death, hot enough to cook flesh from bone in seconds. But when they threw John into that cauldron of death, something unprecedented happened. Not only did he survive, he began preaching. From within the boiling oil, his voice rang out clear and strong, declaring the gospel of Jesus Christ to the stunned crowd. The oil that should have killed him instantly became his pulpit. The instrument of execution became a platform for evangelism. The crowd was speechless. The executioners were baffled. Even Emperor Domitian was forced to acknowledge that this man was under divine protection. But Domitian wasn't finished. If boiling oil couldn't silence this apostle, perhaps poison would succeed where fire had failed. They forced John to drink a lethal concoction, the kind of poison that had never failed to kill its victim. Yet as promised in Mark 16:18, if they drink any deadly poison, it will not hurt them at all. John remained completely unharmed. 2 attempts on his life, 2 miraculous survivals. It was becoming clear that God had other plans for John. Finally, Domitian resorted to a different strategy. If he couldn't kill John, perhaps he could silence him through isolation. The apostle was banished to Patmos, a desolate rocky island in the Aegean Sea, used as a prison for Rome's most dangerous criminals. But isolation couldn't stop what God intended to accomplish through John. In a cave on that barren island, cut off from civilization, John received one of the most profound visions in human history. The book of Revelation, that mysterious, powerful prophecy about the end times and Christ's ultimate victory, was born in exile. What Rome intended as punishment, God transformed into purpose. The island prison became a prophetic classroom. The isolation became inspiration. For 2 years, John remained on Patmos, and during this time, he penned the words that would shape Christian understanding of the future for 2 millennia. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. Behold, I am coming soon. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. When Emperor Domitian died in 96 AD, John was finally allowed to return to Ephesus. But he wasn't the same man who had been exiled. His experience on Patmos had refined him further, adding prophetic insight to his already deep well of love and wisdom. John returned to lead the church in Ephesus, but now he carried with him the visions of Christ's ultimate triumph. He had seen the end of the story, and it was glorious. For the remainder of his life, John continued teaching, writing, and encouraging believers. He completed his gospel, penned his 3 letters, and shared the revelations he had received on Patmos. Of all the apostles who walked with Jesus during his earthly ministry, John was the only one who died of natural causes. Peter was crucified upside down. James the Great was executed by Herod. Andrew was crucified on an X-shaped cross. Thomas was speared to death in India. Matthew was killed with a sword. But John lived. He outlived them all, dying peacefully in Ephesus at the age of 80, after dedicating over half a century to serving Christ's church with unwavering dedication. Why was John spared when all the others faced violent deaths? The answer seems clear. God had a specific plan for this transformed Son of Thunder. He needed to live long enough to complete his unique mission, to be the apostle of love, the recorder of revelation, the living bridge between the apostolic age and the generations that would follow. Today, nearly 2,000 years later, John's writings continue to inspire millions. His gospel presents Jesus in a way no other gospel writer does, as the eternal Word who became flesh. His letters remind us that God is love and challenge us to love one another as Christ loved us. His revelation gives us hope that no matter how dark things get, Christ will ultimately triumph. The man who once wanted to call down fire from heaven to destroy his enemies became the apostle who wrote, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life." The fisherman who couldn't control his temper became the elder who gently commanded, "Little children, love one another." The Son of Thunder became the apostle of love. John's story teaches us that no one is beyond transformation. If God could take a hot-tempered, violent fisherman and turn him into the apostle of love, what might he do with your life? If God could protect John from boiling oil and deadly poison, what impossible situations in your life might he transform for his glory? If God could use John's exile to produce the book of Revelation, what difficulties in your life might he be planning to use for purposes you can't yet imagine? The same God who saved John from the cauldron, who turned his exile into revelation, who transformed his thunder into love, is still working miracles today. The question isn't whether God is powerful enough to intervene in your situation. John's story proves he is. The question is whether you're willing to trust him with your story, even when it doesn't make sense, even when the oil is boiling, even when you're exiled to your own personal Patmos. John's life reminds us that with God, the impossible becomes possible, the bitter becomes sweet, and even sons of thunder can become apostles of love. What transformation is God working in your life today? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories of faith, courage, and divine intervention throughout history.